This UCSD TV program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest programs. Also, make sure to check out and subscribe to our YouTube original channel, UCTV Prime, available only on YouTube.
Welcome, everybody. It's a great honor to be here, and introducing these two young men is not going to be easy because they're already so well known, but let's just do it anyway. Let me tell you a little bit more about them. So I want to introduce two people to you, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom, and he's also a University of California Regent, and my boss's boss. And the other person is Thad Kauser, who's University of California, San Diego professor. So let's start a little bit about Gavin Newsom. Before becoming our 49th Lieutenant Governor, he served on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. In 2003, he was elected mayor of San Francisco, the youngest mayor in more than 100 years, and he was 34 when he got the job. He's been a champion of innovative public policies, and he's gained worldwide attention when he granted marriage licenses to same-sex couples on his 36th day as mayor. He led San Francisco, yes. He led San Francisco to economic recovery by making the city a center of biotech and clean tech. And his administration led the nation on environmental policies, and he was named the greenest mayor. He's been a political visionary on issues of equality, homelessness, and healthcare. And he remains focused on economic development, job creation, and improving access to higher education. Now that deserves he's here today to be interviewed about his book called Citizenville, Reconnecting People and the Government in a Digital Age. And in this book, and hopefully in the interview, he would argue that in spite of the low voter turnout, people still care about government and they need the government. Now about our esteemed colleague, Thad Kauser, who hails from our Department of Political Science. He joined us in 2003 and has already received the UC San Diego Academic Senate's Distinguished Teaching Award and the Faculty Mentor of the Year Award, which is amazing. Most people don't get it till 30 years in their career. That's really amazing. It says something about that. He specializes in state politics, legislatures, legislative elections, and California politics. And he's the author and co-author of many, many books and journal articles. And finally, by default, he's also the captain of our surf team. And I'm told that they did well and they were not in the last place. So with that said, Gavin and Thad, thank you.
All right, thank you so much for coming here, Lieutenant Governor Newsom.
Thank you.
So your book talks about a government that's stuck in the world of Web 1.0, when everyone who it serves has long since moved on to the world of Web 2.0. What are the principles that need to guide government in catching up with the technology of its citizens?
Chancellor, thank you for the introduction. All of you, thank you so much for taking the time, and I'm grateful you agreed to do this or got coerced, however you made it up here on the stage. You know, the fundamental premise of this book, it really started with a question, and we'll get to that perhaps in a moment, about leadership in our city, our state, our nation generally, and the world we're trying to build. But the premise, as I navigated into this topic, was that government operates more like a vending machine than anything else. You put in $1 of taxes, you get police, fire, healthcare, education, you get limited choices. And if you don't like what you get, you do what a lot of us, you must admit, have done in the past to a vending machine. You shake the machine. You may kick the machine. You protest, the Occupy movement on one side, perhaps the Tea Party on the other side. And it's a framework of scarcity. And ultimately, it's a framework where, in essence, you vote and guys like me decide. You vote, we amplify your voices, and we use technology relatively well to to amplify your voices during campaigns, certainly to get you to volunteer, to send emails to your friends, to write a check, to show up on election day. But right when that election's over, we tend to turn those voices off. And we go back to this broadcast model. Every 2 and 4 years, we wake back up and try to wake you back up into an engaged conversation. My argument is that framework, that industrial age model of governance, is running out of gas, as the industrial age economy is running out of gas. Large institutions across all sectors are facing similar challenges as the contours of this digital revolution begin to take shape. Think about the newspaper industry, media in the broadest strokes, the publishing industry, now that I intimately appreciate the struggles they're having, issues that surround the music industry. The old days when you bought an album, now you choose a song. What's happened in the financial service agencies and service industries more broadly, seen those same contours of change. We're now starting to see that take shape in government. And so this book is an exploration of these principles and an acknowledgement of the frame of your question, that this new digital divide that I see is growing rapidly between the world that you're living in your private lives, where you go on Amazon and something arrives on your doorstep the next day. You don't have to fill out forms over and over again. Credit card is captured. You just have to push send. And then the experience we all have when we go down to the DMV, where you fill out one form, you're on the wrong line, sir, you got to go to the other line, and you're in this analog reality. And so how do we square the two? And therein my thesis in the book.
So one of your suggestions is you herald the era of big data. And you talk about how government needs to open up its data sources to allow sort of software engineers, private individuals, and everyone to sort of mash this up with Google Maps and turn it into something that's useful. What do you see as the benefits, and what do you see as the potential risks of government opening up its data sets?
Well, interestingly, when Steve Jobs came out with the iPhone, you may recall he didn't come out with 800,000 apps as we know them. He came out with a dozen, just to get people a taste of what this new platform, this smartphone, can do. His idea was to let you, citizens, third-party developers, come up with solutions. He would create that platform and be a curator of sorts, be a convener. And it got me thinking about this notion of government as a platform. Again, not the vending machine model, a framework of scarcity, limited choices, but this notion of abundance, this capacity for individuals to be reactivated, citizens reactivated in the life of their city and our state. And brought up the whole issue of what is citizenship, the idea of Citizenville, that we're so often treated, aren't we, as subjects, where government, people like me, do things to you. We don't necessarily do things with you. We're engaged again in this one-way conversation, this broadcast model, dare I say it, this professorial model, this sort of lecture of sorts. And that, as I say, is running out of gas. And you're running out of patience, understandably, as it relates to that frame. So this idea of government as a platform, this ability to take information and to use that information in a way that enlivens your senses, distills a sense of well-being in terms of your own capacity to begin to design and develop solutions in your own image, is a framework of this book. Again, government as a platform. How can we reactivate active, not inert citizenship? A two-way conversation. Humanize government. And make government, dare I say, as smart as Google. Why not? And those are the arguments I lay out in the book. And I give examples, specific examples of cities large and small all across the country that are doing just this. This is not just some dream. This is not some fanciful ideal. But you're seeing, again, the contours of this new reality begin to take shape, the manifestation of some of these principles taking shapes, particularly in cities, Democrat, Republican governed cities.
So let's move to some of those examples. So one of the constant refrains of your book is one way is dead, two way is the future. What are some success stories that illustrate governments taking advantage of that?
Well, one of the, and it goes back to your previous questions, President Obama did something rather profound the first day he was in office. Got scant attention. Probably that's an exaggeration. Scant. Got no attention whatsoever. And that was he signed an executive order, the dreaded executive orders, so many lament, on a open data initiative. Now, he said we're going to take data sets. We're going to take government information that government has that have been captured in the vaults of agencies and departments, and we're going to release it to the public to do everything that I'm arguing should be done. He took the cue, interestingly, from President Reagan, who did exactly this in 1980s when he took satellite technology and satellite data, taxpayer-subsidized satellite information, and said, you know what, I'm going to open this data up to all of you. I don't know what you'll make of it, what you'll do with it, but it's no longer just going to be the agency at the National Oceanic Administration. We're going to open that data up. What happened? Well, every single one of you in this room probably benefited from that significant action today. You probably drove here. Most of you knew where you're going. Those of you who didn't used your GPS. Perhaps this morning on your smartphone you used your GPS. I imagine most of you said, boy, the weather is looking better. I wonder if this is going to continue. What's next weekend look like? And you went on your weather channel or you did your smartphone. All those weather apps that exist, all of that is because of this new platform that was created because we opened up this data. Millions, by the way, of jobs have been created just in that one act. An extraordinary amount of wealth has been created. It's still government, still in your hands. We access it, but you as individuals can access it, and companies and corporations can access it. What else is trapped down at the library system in San Diego? What else is trapped at San Diego in this wonderful university? All that extraordinary research and development that has been government funded. You paid for it. Why can't we access it? And what happens when you put those data sets up is an answer to your question. Remarkable things happen. In my example, the first one, when I did a similar open data initiative as mayor of San Francisco, I was, and I appreciate the chancellor's reference to some of the environmental work, but you think gay marriage, chancellor, was controversial. You have no idea. I required composting in San Francisco. That was controversial. The garbage police out there, they had a lot of fun at my expense. But we have the highest recycling rate, San Francisco, in the nation, and business community embraced it. We're almost 80% recycling. And that's why we did the plastic bag things, a lot of things that got some more attention. So I was particularly focused on that, and I do this open data initiative. The next day, I kid you not, it's in the book, as an actual example, a private group of folks, we put some data up around recycling centers, and within hours, this third-party developer puts an app called EcoFinder to make it easy to access where the local recycling centers are and to inform people how to compost appropriately, et cetera. Now, if I had done that as mayor, I would have gone through a procurement process. I'd have done an RFQ, request for, or RFI, and request for information, RFQ for qualifications, and then after that, after 4 or 5 months, we would have done a request for proposals. Then we would go through a proposal process. We would have the lowest, most responsive bid, which means we probably have to rebid it. Eventually, after the second cycle of fiscal appropriation, if we haven't lost the appropriation because of the new supervisors that came in or the new city administrator, we may have ultimately spent a couple $100,000 to begin the process to do just that. Now, we saved the taxpayers a lot of money. All of a sudden, we said, boy, this open data thing's interesting. What else can we put out there? Started putting crime data up there. Started putting transit data up there. Everyone's frustrated by the lack of timeliness. We don't necessarily trust stuff coming from government. So we put the raw data sets out there and let people scrape that data and figure out whether or not there was veracity to what we were asserting. And all these apps started appearing. So we created an app store, not dissimilar to Steve Jobs, but our own app store for the city. And millions of dollars, I don't exaggerate, was saved. And we started sharing these data examples with other mayors. Mayor Fenty, the former mayor of Washington, D.C., does a hackathon to get white hat hackers to engage in similar type of data scraping. And they go out over a weekend, they do these crazy hackathons. Over the way, it's like a telethon, but hackathon, taking data. And I mean, it's just remarkable. These people come right out and they start putting up on their data sites similar type of app stores. Now there's hundreds and hundreds of these examples all across the country. Cost taxpayers nothing. And all we had to do was provide the information that's yours anyway. And so that's the principle. These are the principles of this movement. And I think they're incredibly profound. And in that openness, dare I say, comes something incredibly important, and that's transparency, which builds trust. In a time when we're not transparent, we certainly aren't open in government, and you don't really trust us for good reasons. And I think in many ways this is an antidote to the stale debate we're having in government today about who's to blame, and a framework that I think represents the world we're now living in, as again we move from this industrial economy that has served us well to the economy that we're entering into in this information age.
Great. So you argue that technology is not government's core competency. That
I don't need to argue that. You already know that.
And so what we need to do is build, open application programming interfaces and let private entrepreneurs and normal citizens come through. And if we build these APIs, they will come. Yeah. And you have a lot of success stories, but they're from San Francisco, New York, Washington D.C., and a suburb of Austin. So is there?
I mean, Manor, Texas. Though 500 or 600 people who live there, we'd be proud to be recognized.
But it is a suburb of Austin, right? So, and is this going to be a movement that in the short term is going to be limited to the places that have technology,
No.
or?
Well, you think about it. I was with Tom Friedman, and I see Julie, my right, who's one of the best, and she hosted a wonderful economic development forum in Santa Clara, and Tom Friedman was our keynote, and they were kind enough. Julie allowed me to interview Tom as you're interviewing me, and I asked him a simple question: what world are we living in? And he had such a wonderful response that tied so perfectly. I included it in the book. He said, think about this. When I wrote my book, The World is Flat, book that probably most of you know, he talks about this connected world. It was a book about globalization. It was on the New York Times bestseller list in 2005, not 1995, 2005. And he made the point that Facebook wasn't even in that book. Talking about globalization and connective world. It was a tech book as much more than anything else. Facebook wasn't there. He said Twitter was a sound. The cloud was in the sky. 4G was a parking space. LinkedIn, a prison. Apps were things you filled out to get into, California. I mean, you got it, Chancellor. And Skype for most of us was a typo. Think about those. All those things are ubiquitous in our lives. Apps, Skyping, LinkedIn, Facebook, tweeting. These things didn't exist as we know them 6 or 7 years ago. His point, we're not living in a connected world, but a hyper-connected world. And so my point is, you're right. We're seeing just the embers of this. But I happen to think there's something radical, word that scares people, understandably. Something radical taking shape as it relates to the flattening impact of technology. And what I mean by flattening, just think about what happened in the Arab Spring. Now, that was not conceived of by anything else but injustice. But certainly those voices were amplified by the tools of technology, not just Facebook, the Facebook youth of Tahrir Square, but by technology broadly. Photographs, YouTube, positioning, in many respects, geo-positioning and GPS satellite technology. You've seen the same thing in Spain, the Ignatos in Spain, or the Weibos in China, 250 million strong. It's the Twitter of China. And a government that spends, incidentally, Economist magazine just noted this, I didn't believe it until I looked it up, a government that spends more money suppressing their own citizens' right to free speech than they do on national defense. Still cannot shut down those voices. And I note the Occupy and the extent that has legs, but Tea Party certainly does in the United States. So there's this sense of populism, there's social change in the air. Big is getting small, is my point. And small, organized, self-organizing communities are getting big. Think of Obama's campaign in 2008, mybarackobama.com. 35,000 self-organizing communities came together. Talk about networked intelligence. Self-organizing communities. Bottom up, not top-down thinking. Not machine thinking, vending machine. Organic. There's new language here, new metaphors are being formed. Something serious is happening here. And those that don't believe it I've been whipsawed by, and I remember the newspaper industry not that long ago when I was mayor, all this is exaggerated, this blogging, all this stuff. We're not that worried about it. All of a sudden now it's obvious in hindsight. Music industry, after Steve Jobs makes a deal with Napster, these radicals, all of a sudden Jobs comes out with an agreement with the industry, and all of a sudden that changed radically. We're talking now about online education, aren't we? And all the nervousness. He's going to be replaced with a robot or artificial intelligence. What does that mean? Khan Academy, flipping the classroom. This idea of individualized learning, not mass education, not this broadcast model of education, starting to take shape. So I just think this is a big idea, and it's hardly new. What I'm doing is just trying to aggregate the thinking on this. But I really profoundly believe that we're about to go through something radically different than what any of us have come to be used to in the last 50 to 100 years as it relates to our democracy. And the good thing is, it means you matter more than ever. And citizens can be reactivated because technology democratizes voices. It gives people voices that didn't have voices. It allows you to organize in ways that only government could organize in the past and accomplish things that used to be the purview of large institutions, corporations, or government.
Thanks. So the very title of this book, Citizenville, is an allusion to a game, Farmville. And you come up with the radical notion that government should actually have games and encourage citizen interaction with governments through something like a Facebook game. And you even think that this might make interacting with government fun.
Well, yeah, no, I've never seen it like it. You all have these, right? Your nieces, your sons or daughters, your grandkids. So I finally I have two incredible kids. They're on the way. My daughter's now 3.5. I swear to you, I'm not kidding. When she was 1, my cell phone was sitting back, iPhone 3 at the time, I guess. And I watched her just go open it right up, start flipping through, doing the apps, trying to buy new apps, but couldn't because she didn't have my password. And she literally, she could not talk, and she sure as heck wasn't walking. And I was watching this, and I remember calling my wife saying, honey, we all think it may be true, but it's true. We have a prodigy. We got to call our friend. We got to, let's call some reporters. They got us do this. Is incredible. And my wife agreed. Until we got her into preschool a year ago. They start them young. And I looked around, and every single one of these kids was doing the same thing. And I started realizing that this generation is just wired differently. To with my point, you can't educate my daughter like I was educated. This is the digital natives we talk about. They're growing up digital. This is a generation of choice. A world that's being designed around them, literally customized around them and their choices. As everything goes mobile devices, localized services, social networks, and with the ubiquity of the cloud, you have access now to this world brain that's being formed. Access to literally the genius latent inside of every single one of you. And so that's the great struggle as we have a generation, this millennial generation, 30 and younger, that have grown up digital, and then the digital immigrants like me, and some of you, right, that are learning the language. And the issues and frictions related to privacy. The issues and frictions about a life where, we don't necessarily want to just download a simple app and then find out that that app and their download and all our information has been shared and sold around the world. And so this is the burden and the opportunity, is to cater to this new reality that's taking shape and to begin to design our systems based on where people are. Thus, this long-winded point about games. You can't make this up. Mark Pincus started Farmville by starting a company called Zynga. I remember meeting Mark when I was mayor. He showed up in one of my states of the city because I heard that he went from 100 employees to 300, and I was doing an economic development speech, and I wanted to highlight this guy. I didn't understand a damn thing. The guy comes in, I said, I want to put you on stage. He goes, that would be amazing. He goes, yeah, I've just started this company. It's growing. It's unbelievable. I said, what do you do? He goes, well, I do this online game, and it's an amazing thing. We cultivate gardens, and people purchase plows, and they actually cultivate, and they spend, I said, what do you mean purchase? He said, oh, they write, the credit cards are like $59 for acorns, $100. I said, come on. How the hell is that growing? And people spending hours and hours a day and weeks. I thought, come on, who are these? Just kids? Go, no, women, average age 42. I'm like, come on. Not possible. I had never heard of this thing. And so, you do a little bit of research on this. You start looking just globally, 500 million people spend an hour a day or more on online games. You look at any kid, kids literally 8 to 18 are spending 53 hours a week. 53, you know this, parents and grandparents. 53 hours a week on online media and entertainment. And if you're a young kid under 21 years old, you have probably officially, and there's studies that bear this out, spent more time online playing games than in the classroom. So my whole point of the book is to meet you where you are. You're already there. And how can government meet you where you are? And how can we take this gamification model and educate you? Remember the way we were educated as kids. Remember the bill on Capitol Hill? And we all remember it, right? It entertained us and it educated us. The only thing they didn't talk about were lobbyists. But everything else was right. Schoolhouse Rock. But it was indelible. So how do we start educating people about the importance of the Department of Public Works or the Building Inspection Commissioner, the work your district attorney does? And how do we frame those discussions in a different way? And so that's my riff on Farmville, Citizenville. And trust me, I never thought I'd start a project that I did a year and a half ago, and end up believing that these budget challenges you can do online and these other things that are being done with civic currency where people are getting virtual dollars. Manor, Texas, that's the suburb outside of Austin that literally has Manor Labs where people get civic currency for doing a civic project, and they're actually given InnoBucks. And the local newspaper, the equivalent of UT and others, will actually advertise the person with the most InnoBucks because of their civic contribution. And it's reputational, and it matters to people because they want to feel recognized for their contribution to their community. And they're now businesses that are taking the InnoBucks, the virtual InnoBucks, and providing discounts in their business because they want to recognize these citizens for their active engagement. There are all these examples. And they're beautiful because they just go to that fundamental notion of the Commonwealth, this fact that we're all in this together. And it's people not waiting around for Washington, D.C. to solve all our problems, not waiting around for Sacramento to grow up, not waiting around for City Hall to get their act together. We're not waiting for the guy or gal, and this is my original point, on the white horse to save the day. Because I keep getting disappointed, and I imagine you do too. I was thinking of Lincoln. My wife had a film nominated at the Academy Awards yesterday, and I was so proud to be there. So I'm only going to bring it up because I don't want you to think I'm the politician running on the red carpet trying to go to Hollywood. I was there for a legitimate purpose. But all the talk about Lincoln, though they didn't do as well as they hoped. But I remember a quote from Lincoln that never gets brought up. He says, "We're all born originals, but we die copies." And I think about that in the context of campaigns for politicians. Because I watch these campaigns and I'm like, all right, saying all the right things. These guys are creative, they're original. And then I think of those politicians when they're termed out, they just died copies. It's as if the process de-geniuses you. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it's the system. As good as Barack Obama may be and as talented, maybe it's the system. As good or talented as you may have thought Schwarzenegger could be, he's independent, maybe it's the system. And maybe we are part of the problem. There's that great billboard, I think it's on the 405 or something, says, worst traffic area. It says, you're not stuck in traffic. And you're like, oh, what the hell is this billboard? It says, you are traffic. Think about it. Think about it in the context of our frustration on sequestration, our frustration in all these things, and funding to higher education. Our role in all these things. And so my whole frame in that context is leadership and taking some responsibility again, some account to our responsibilities as citizens. The one thing that should connect all of us, regardless of our political ideology or our political stresses. And I remember my dad, and it's interesting, Tom Peters, the business writer, I credit for this, but I remember years ago my father saying something similar. He said, what did Martin Luther King, Václav Havel, Nelson Mandela, and Gandhi have in common at the peak of their influence? Gandhi, Mandela, King, and Havel, at the peak of their influence. And I would try to answer, with a thoughtful response and get it wrong. He said, jail time. And it's true. When these guys were changing the world, they all shared that in common. And one other thing, none of them had formal authority. They all had moral authority, and they exercised it. And the point he was saying, the point that I'm arguing in this book, is you don't need to be someone to do something. Or you don't need to be something to do something. That we all have a responsibility, and we all have the capacity now, particularly with the enabling tools of technology. Increasingly, the solutions are in our hands, in your pockets, on your laptop at home, in your car. And so that's the spirit of this, exercising one's moral authority. Interestingly, and one could argue, you're the political scientist, but when Havel became president of Czechoslovakia and Mandela president of South Africa, one could argue their ability to move things waned because of the realities of that limited formal role. So this book's about leadership. It's about citizenship. It's about active engagement. It's about our individual role to participate as opposed to just complain, and make the case that we are what we manifest all around us.
Right. So the final question, boss, since you're a member of the UC Board of Regents.
Oh yeah, let's go there.
What should we be doing differently as a university to use the tools of technology to further our mission?
Well, one thing, we should have an open data principle at the UC Regents. We don't. We're talking about, interestingly, privatizing all that data to sell it because we're a budget crisis. I mean, the exact opposite of the principles I'm trying to argue for here. You subsidize it as taxpayers, you funded it, but we're going to privatize it, monetize it. This is where, Governor Brown's out of town, so I can say this as acting governor. Few days where a lieutenant governor can claim any status. This is where the governor and I had a little friction the last couple of years, where these $2 billion of cuts to higher ed. We just didn't see eye to eye. And I recall in 2010, Governor Schwarzenegger had a massive budget deficit, arguably bigger than the one that Brown inherited in his first year, and they enhanced the budget at UC and CSU. Wasn't easy, but it was a priority. We didn't do that the last couple of years, and you've seen what's happened. Not just the UC, CSU, but obviously the community college system. Now it's $46 a unit. It was $26 a unit just a couple years ago. You've seen we've doubled tuition here since 2007, more than tripled it, close to 400% since 2001. You look at any inflation rates in California or nationally, I mean, it's astonishing that we've gotten away with it. But understandably so, because now less than 11% of the budget at the UC system comes from you, the public. De facto, we've been privatizing the entire system, not just its data, for years and years. And now we're pricing out, notably, the middle class. If you're earning just a little more, when you hit 70, 75,000, 80, you're in trouble. Those families now don't have the benefits of the Cal Grants or the Pell Grants. And it's no longer the best deal in town. And you consider, in the 50s and 60s and 70s, when we were the tent pole of the American economy, when California was in the future business, we had the finest K through 12, not just K through 16 educational system. And this was our conveyor belt for talent. And if we weren't conveying talent, we had wonderfully progressive open immigration policies where we always were able to get the best and the brightest from around the world. We were getting first round draft choices from all around the world. And we're losing that edge. And the burden of success is it leaves clues. That's why I love casing other people's joints. I have about 15 businesses and about 1,000 employees. And I learned this early on, that successful companies in my industry, they leave clues of their success. So I just was constantly casing their joints, trying to learn from them. Well, that's what's happened in California the last 20 years, 30 years, is folks are trying to replicate this model. And you're seeing a lot of those cities that you exampled are building off the master plan and the principles that in many ways we invented. We're now competing against ourselves, is the argument. And so we have to wake up to this reality, because you cannot have an economic development strategy without a workforce development strategy. And we're not going to be able to compete and get back on our feet and get back to where we were in the 50s, 60s, and 70s as that tentpole in the American economy in terms of job creation, unless we out-educate. And we're uniquely positioned to do it, but we've got to prioritize it. So I'm grateful that the governor is now showing up at UC Regents meetings. It's an education in and of itself. We had a 45-minute discussion about German philosophers last time and Roman Empire. It's good stuff. You should watch it. Knows his stuff. And I'm grateful we've stabilized, whether you love Prop 30 or not, we've stabilized the finances of the institution. But we need to double down and start making investments again in this system at our own peril. And final point, coming from the private sector, I'm a pro-business Democrat, and I should say I'm a pro-job Democrat, which means I'm a pro-business Democrat, because you can't be pro-jobs from my perspective and anti-business. But I will say the business community is kind of, with notable exceptions down here, Qualcomm and Jacobs and others, there's some notable exceptions here, has basically been asleep at the wheel as well. And someone the other day told me that's not surprising, because the businesses of 20, 30 years ago operated locally. Someone said now the businesses are hovering over the state of California. They don't really operate here. Think of Apple and Foxconn. Think of all these companies, multinational, they hover. They're not as invested as they once were in the community. And that's the missing link and piece from my perspective, that we have got to twin the two. That's how the master plan was conceived. It wasn't just some isolated idea from radical politicians, Governor Pat Brown and others. It was in partnership with the business community about the world we're living in and what are the trend lines that define it, and how can we meet that workforce and its needs. We have 1.8 million people in California that cannot find work, that are actively searching for work. I left Marin County 2 days ago, 5.5% unemployment, the lowest of the 58 counties. Imperial County, not far from where we are, 25.5% unemployment as we sit. You can't make that disparity up. These are Depression-era numbers. And we're not going to address this until we address this final point. And that is the number one complaint I get, connecting back to the book and the topic of technology, is all these big tech companies can't find enough people. You say, well, wait, there's 1.8 million people that are actively seeking work, and all these companies from Salesforce.com, Twitter, Google, Zynga, all these places cannot find the talent because we're not conveying it like we used to. We're not getting the computer scientists out there. All these folks that are mashing up this data we're talking about, we're not educating enough of them. And we can't compete in that environment. And so it's a long way of saying I'm resolved and hopeful that Brown's new engagement and a settling the dust in terms of the budget and the solvency that now has been advanced with our operational budget in California could begin to refocus our energy on this engine of growth for California.
Thank you. Well, speaking of two-way communication, now it's time to thank you for your...
Oh, yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Can I just offer this, because I'm a politician with a microphone. What else is new? Filter. This is another great challenge, and I just think many of you know this, but I bet a lot of you don't know this. If you and I both went online, and you used your device, I used my device, and we both Googled UCSD, you're going to get different search results than I will, even though we both Googled the exact same thing. There is a filter bubble as it relates to all of your previous searches and my previous searches. Relates to the device I use versus the device you use. 57 different considerations go in to determining what your search looks like, what my search looks like. You may watch Fox, I may watch Current TV. I used to work there. You read Drudge, you read HuffPost. And this is the great burden, right, that we have. We're filtered down to layers. So we can't even accept the same set of facts so we can engage in a baseline conversation. And this is something that technology exacerbates, but also is beginning to resolve. And so in a point of optimism, I lay out some examples of where the two start to meet, where we can have baseline information, the digital town square that is the subtitle of my book, and how we can reconcile some of those issues.
All right. So speaking of internet searches, one of the audience members recently read that the U.S. lags behind Korea on internet speed. Shouldn't we be the fastest, and that this is partially blamed on the monopolies of cable companies? Is there a solution to
By the
getting
way, any of you been to Korea, South Korea, been at the Incheon Airport? New Incheon Airport? I was just there. Some of you, I just can't help myself on this. We have a new free trade agreement with South Korea, and it occurred to me that no one was particularly interested from California to making a case for the trade. So I went out with a couple folks, not on your dime, paid for it privately, a few months back, and made a case because South Korea's biggest trading partner in the United States is California. Not surprising. We don't have an office there, no trade delegation, nothing. And I flew out of Incheon Airport, and this is the only airport in the world, I can say this, that I've experienced, where you were hoping your plane was not only delayed, but canceled. I mean, there's an airport right there. I mean, the hotel right there. I don't golf, but there's 2 golf courses. I know all of you golf down here. There's a movie theater. There's a museum. There's a shopping mall like you've never seen. It's unbelievable. I flew from there to LAX. I don't have to say anything. It literally was like flying from the Jetsons to the Flintstones. And there's a whole, we can go into the frame on that, but is it any wonder our infrastructure, that includes broadband, used to be number 1. Now we're 26th in download speeds in the world. Someone just said now we're 28th. There's a new study. I know we're behind Latvia. And right. You know where Latvia is. So that's, you're highly educated. Most of us don't. I mean, this is serious stuff. And so it goes to the issue of the digital divide. It's not just access, it's the quality of that access as well. And it's not just access, it's the knowledge. Because the cost of devices is dropping significantly. You could get new tablets now, versions of our iPads, for $20. There are new tablet makers coming out with $20 devices. But it doesn't mean that you know how to access and you don't have the knowledge and the skills behind it. So this is sort of the new divide within the digital divide. It's not just access to the internet, it's how one accesses and how one utilizes it. It's because we haven't taken this stuff seriously. We stopped investing in our lead in infrastructure and education and our robust research and development partnerships, which built this town. And we've got to get back, as Bill Clinton says, in the future business again. And Korea gets it. I start my book with a conversation, though, with the president of Estonia. Again, a country you know with great familiarity. I had confessed I didn't. I know all about it today. And I naively did not do my research when I met Tuomas, the president of Estonia, as mayor. And he was coming out to Silicon Valley to meet with all the tech companies. And he does what folks do. They meet the local mayor so they could justify their trip. Which is a great deal for me, being mayor of the city. And I start coming in and saying, I'm doing this big Wi-Fi initiative, free Wi-Fi with Google, Mr. President. And let me tell you, we've got this parking meters now. We're doing pilot where you can pay, get this, Mr. President, you can pay your parking meters on your phone. You don't have to put in a quarter. And I was, I thought this is pretty good stuff. I'm trying to teach this guy a thing or two. That 34-year-old mayor, hotshot. And he's there with his translator. And I love these foreign leaders. They always have their translators, even though he speaks perfect English. And he says to the translator, basically, I got this. And looks at me and goes, you got to be kidding me. I said, I know, it's pretty impressive. And he says, for over a decade, they've not just been paying their meters, they've been paying their property taxes with their phones. They've got Wi-Fi. They were even experimenting with voting online, whether you like that or not. They had already been there and done that. registering online. They've been doing for years. We just started in California. And the reason why is in 1991, when they pulled out of the Soviet Union, they leapfrogged all this technology. This comes directly to the question. We're stuck with all this legacy, this just junk. Seriously. We are, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not an expert in this, but I kind of know a thing or two about it because I studied this and now I'm in it. We're in California, California, the state of dreamers, of doers, of entrepreneurs, of innovators, always on the leading and cutting edge of new ideas. We are on the cutting edge of 1973 when it relates to technology. It's Vietnam era technology. That DMV, you saw, I don't know if you saw the headlines 2 weeks ago, $208 million upgrade through HP of our DMV system. We just dumped the contract because they've spent more than half the money and they weren't even halfway done to update 40-year-old technology that can collapse at any minute and shut down the entire registration system in the state. And you think that's bad? Hold on. This is a fact. In 2004, 58 systems for our case management work through the courts engaged in a consolidation. It was spec'd at $260 million of your money. It's an enterprise agent, but your money, taxpayer dollars. $260 million. Hefty price in 2004. Was going to be complete in 2008. This system is not only not upgraded, it's now more dysfunctional than ever. And the new estimate, not 260 million, not 360, 465, 760, 860, not a billion, not 1.5 billion, not 1.6, $1.9 billion. And if we commit to wasting more of your money, we think it could get done by 2015. I bet every single one of you, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions, never heard of that. But I bet every single one of you have heard about the scandal at the state's Parks Department. With all that money they didn't spend. It's still in the account. How is that possible? Hundreds of millions of dollars wasted. There was one in the audit, I'm not making this up, 103 change orders by a contractor, a $30 million subcontract, over $300 million. I mean, you talk about corruption. You talk about waste. The payroll system in the state of California, controller just fired their folks, $371 million system. We've spent $254 million, shut down. I give you example after example after example. And what we're trying to do, it's a long way away, is patch together these old legacy systems. We're still building out IT departments. Meanwhile, your nieces and nephews at 16 years old are doing new websites over the weekend for free. I mean, there's an app for that. So this is my frustration, but this is me shaking the machine of your consciousness as well. That we've got to change and we've got to reconcile this reality. And we've got to take the lead of places like Latvia and, yes, Estonia.
So another audience member says that most Californians see government as owned by special interests that fund their campaigns, and with this huge size of districts, it requires legislators just to be professional fundraisers who are detached from their representatives. How would digital access promise to change this system and reconnect legislators with their constituents?
Well, there's this whole sort of fraud we perpetuate that governing is getting elected. I mean, kind of think of it that way. Right? The whole, hey, I got elected, thank you. Now we're all done, we can go home till I need you again. And again, that's this notion of inert citizenship. You vote, I decide, this broadcast model for 2-4 years, and then come back, we amplify your voices. And you're right, the only way we're keeping you amplified is to keep raising money. And we can get into all those issues. We won't have time, but I'm happy to. What I'm arguing for is what Obama tried to do in 2008. This is kind of fun. He said exactly what I said. Guy on the white horse, come to save the day. Do my open data initiative, I promised to do it. He said in the transition that I'm going to do this open data thing. I want to keep these 35,000 communities engaged in this robust two-way conversation that we've all been having and the one you've been having with yourselves. Let's keep this going. He did something called change.gov because it was a campaign of change. You may recall this vaguely. when I described very briefly. So he had a big town hall because he wanted to know what was on your mind. I think the website said this: we have a war in Iraq, we have a war in Afghanistan, a war on terror, we have challenges of climate change, fiscal crisis is upon us. What's on your mind? Please join us in the conversation on change.gov. And folks joined him on that conversation. But my book argues it's not about petitioning government. It's about creating a mechanism where we can more effectively self-govern. That they're missing the point slightly. If the idea is government as a platform, we should be the conduit. I don't think that government can, nor do I, as a progressive Democrat, think we should deliver solutions to every single problem. I think, as my friend Eric Liu says, we should be big on what? Solving the issues of ignorance and poverty and disease, but small on how, less prescriptive on how we actually deliver those solutions. And it's just a governing philosophy that I have. Because I think there's remarkable capacity with all of you that we haven't tapped. And one thing I've learned the hard way is experts in government don't know everything. No one is an expert in everything, but everyone is an expert in something. How do we tap that networked intelligence of all of you? We don't do that. And so that's what I'm arguing for in terms of how that two-way conversation would look. And we have example after example of platforms that are doing this. New York just did a pilot for participatory budgets. Imagine if your mayor, Bob, came out and said, you know what, this year's budget, we're going to put up $50 million of our general fund, and we're going to create a platform for real citizen participation where we weed out the dullards on both ideological extremes, and we have a real active citizen deliberative engagement, not a town hall where the loudest voices always drown yours out. That always happening at a time that's inconvenient for you. That is a substitute for real engagement that's held every 3 to 6 months to satiate the press. But a platform of real engagement where you participate in making the tough decisions and choosing what you prioritize in your community as it relates to budgets. New York did this with a small project of $6 million. Unbelievably successful. You know, the highest level of participation was in minority communities, debunking a lot of the myths about the digital divide in New York. Dominant participation, African American and Latino community. Brazil has been doing this for years. Talk about Twitter trends. During the World Cup a couple years ago, their big participatory budgeting process was trending higher in Brazil than the World Cup. I'm not kidding you. Because of the active engagement that's part of it. That's just one of many examples where we can feel a sense of ownership and connection again to the life of our city as an example.
All right. We have 1 minute to wrap up.
I think I'll do the lightning round. These are long
Excellent.
answers. I apologize.
So one audience member says, you are not stuck in government. You are government.
I know. I know. Well done. Back at him.
What's the most pivotal exercise you feel could move government closer to its constituents?
Well, I just think this issue of and I struggle with this, and in the book I talk about this notion of my default being secrecy as government official. When the press sunshines me or has a freedom of information, I just know it's tomorrow's hit piece headline. And every person that works in government knows the same thing. Because we want to know your emails, who are you talking to, who'd you meet with, how much money do they raise for you, all important. But the frame is give them least amount of information possible because this is going to be bad. We just don't want to make it worse. Talk about self-inflicted wounds. Just don't provide everything. This default has to evolve itself. I mean, the WikiLeaks phenomenon has proved nothing else. Heck, the drone debate, where President Obama, Mr. Transparency, is holding on to legal briefs as it relates to due process for American citizens, the ready, fire, aim strategy for due process with drone strikes. Even he has struggled with this. We've got to disenthrall, another sort of Lincoln-esque word, ourselves to this frame. So openness needs to be a core principle of this new movement. Transparency. We live in a glass neighborhood. We live in a fishbowl. And we have to prepare ourselves for the contours of this change as it relates to Anonymous, WikiLeaks, these white hat hackers, these black hat hackers, and others. Information, as Stuart Brand, the legendary Stuart Brand said, wants to be free. Invariably and inevitably, it will be. This capacity to note secrecy, that's a day that is long gone. I'll close with this just final point on the issue of privacy, because I now passed my sell-by date on this evening. Though I do hope a couple of you buy the books. Sincerely, I'll write anything you want in the book. I'll stay as long as you want. Transparency and privacy go hand in hand. Transparency and privacy go hand in hand in this respect. I gave you the example of the app. So many of us are on marketing lists, and so many of us are getting these push-fed things, and our information, private information, is being sold because we're not informed. There's a lack of transparency. There's no informed consent. There needs to be more transparency and informed consent as it relates to our privacy. This is a fundamental principle. And I think all of you would agree with me in this. Privacy is now a new currency. You can give it up and get something in return. When you give up your privacy, your location, you see those things that pop up on your iPhone all the time, you get a customized service, a better service. Some of us may be willing to do that, but some of us may not. Some of us may actually want to pay for that better service than to give up that private information. So I just want to leave you with that, again, core value. Transparency and privacy must go hand in hand. And I must go sign some books with my left hand. I'm grateful all of you took the time. This is a real gift for me, and I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you for all your help. Thank you.